All right, welcome back to the morning show here on the Rise News. And having closed all land borders with neighboring countries in October, following an earlier closure of its borders with the Western neighbors, the Republic of Benin in August recently, development reveals that the federal government may likely extend the duration of the ongoing exercise swift response across the nation's border to next year. I think there's been a rebuttal as regards that.
Yes. So since the commencement of the exercise, it's been believed that in the month of October, Nigeria has saved a total of 1.4 billion naira. However, despite the efforts of the federal government of Nigeria to ensure that the country's economy is up and running, the biting economic hardship and increase in food items and daily utilities are referred to by some critics as a fallout from the continuing closure of the borders.
Well, joining us now is Lawrence Anova Utsaha, Utsaha, public affairs analyst and former Benue State Social Democratic Party gubernatorial aspirant. Thank you so much for joining us. Let me begin by asking you, because there are divergent views to this continued closure. And the closure of border on the African continent is nothing new. Either you're closing for disease outbreak or for security. However, this is trade-related. And I wonder what side of the fence are you on? The Nigerian government has said 2 billion naira has been saved since the closure. Our neighbors, Ghana, Benin, Cameroon, are complaining that this is having biting effects and this should be stopped. But where are you in all of this? What's your take?
Thank you very much for that question. I stand with the position of the government, but I would say I stand with the position more holistically. I don't stand with it in isolation. I don't look at it purely or simply from the perspective of trade alone or for security alone. I think it is multifaceted. But as it were, I stand with the position of the government. My only concern for now will be if it goes beyond the security concerns and the trade concerns we have raised. I would love to see a situation whereby this particular position is premeditated on a carefully preconceived plan that looks at infrastructure deficit, looks at, perhaps you want to talk about the fact that government wants to raise 3 million millionaires within this period, and we want to see how we want to impact on the lives of these entrepreneurs. I want to look at it more diversified beyond just security and trade-related matters. That would be my position.
Let's look at it holistically, because you beg to look at it holistically. And let's talk about trade and diversification across the West African sub-region. Countries like Ghana are beginning to cite the provisions of the ELTS. I mean, that's the ECOWAS, agreement as regards the movement and passage of goods and goods in general. Also, Ghana sent a high-powered delegation. 2 top ministers from Ghana came to Nigeria as regards this and the harmful effect it has on their businesses in Ghana. Do you think we're doing what is right at all? And do you think it's the best way to be able to go as regards this?
I think it's the best way of going around it. If you look at it critically, they may not really be on point as per the way they complain is affecting their economy. It's affected us in very diverse and negative ways, which is why we've taken this position. Now, even if you were to look at the ECOWAS treaty they talked about, there are certain provisions that should be followed. If a ship berths in your country and then goods are delivered, the duty is paid, there are provisions that you're supposed to escort all of this to the destination country and what you're supposed to pay to the destination country. I mean, only recently we heard the custom telling us that they were able to raise over 5 billion from the temporary border closures. So I don't think they really have a case. They are only trying to be smart by half. But what I would say is we should not, I would not really be bothered about Ghana and Benin and Cameroon complaining. I would rather be bothered if Niger is complaining and Chad is complaining. The aforementioned countries are countries that have physical affinity to the ocean. They have their own coastal borders too. But Niger and Chad does not. So I would ordinarily be expecting that they should complain we have closed our borders because we are servicing them. If they are not complaining, then there's a problem. What we are doing is not yet holistically. That's my challenge.
So what we're seeing here is almost like a substitution for importation, regulating and curbing the appetite of Nigerians so that they can actually focus on locally produced goods. However, if the local industry does not have a comparative advantage in the tradable sector, does it make any sense that we're closing borders if we've not set up the infrastructure to produce some of these goods, therefore regulating the prices of things like rice, tomatoes, and other food items?
No, I think it's like asking which one comes first, the egg or the hen, in this regard. Yes, it is possible for you to provide the infrastructure before you effect the closure. In that way, you have some sort of liberty to play around with. But it's also possible that you hold yourself tight in a very closed corner and ensure that you breed yourself out or you reproduce yourself out of that should I call it a lacuna now? Or I would say from the corner you found yourself in. It depends on how you look at it. But for me, the only challenge I may have with this is perhaps the hypocrisy of the ruling class. Yes, this would largely affect most of the enterprises you've mentioned, and that's why I talked about being holistic. The ruling class too should have some limitations, some sacrifice they need to put across. At every point in time when you are discussing sacrifice in this country, it's always placed solely on the heads of the followership. Perhaps we should also close our borders against foreign medical attention. Perhaps we should also close our borders against importation of generators so that the people who are really benefiting from Nigeria also have some sort of sacrifice. So, and that's why I always go back to the point of making it holistic. You see, there's this other angle to it. It may be tangential, but it's a little bit related. We don't have roads in Nigeria. Only last week I traveled from Abuja to Ibadan, and I used more potholes than roads. And then you look, if we continue using our land borders all around the country to transport freight, it has more impact on the negative impact on the longevity of our roads, for instance. I would love a situation whereby we handle freight with rail transportation, but that's a tall order, But the question now is, we're closing the borders. Yesterday we had a report that the borders will be reopened on the 31st of January 2020, but then there's a counter order that is only the first phase that will be reopened. The question is all of this beyond security and trade? Does it have any impact on perhaps a national development plan or an item on the national development plan? These are the things I'm more persuaded about. I am really wanting to look beyond the politics of it to the governance model.
Well, Mr. Utsaha, how holistic can this be? Because you've repeatedly said it has to be holistic. And I want to ask you, because barring any last-minute changes or delay, trading under the framework of the AfCFTA is to commence in July next year. And with these latest developments with Nigeria closing its borders indiscriminately, and countries such as Ghana, Benin, and Cameroon, neighboring countries who have become points of illegal smuggling. They've made their countries destinations for this illegal smuggling. Do you think that African countries are really ready to implement this trade agreement next year?
Well, I think it's good for us to speak about Nigeria. There's what we can condone and there's what we cannot, should not, and must not condone. If it doesn't favor us, we shouldn't go for it. Even if it's going to be implemented. You recall when our president signed the agreement in Niger, there was jubilation all over Africa. We are integral. Nigeria has the potentials of being a country you don't play with. But over time, as it has shown, we've been a dumping ground. So if this is an opportunity for us to tell Africa what we cannot condone, so be it. That's my position. Irrespective of whatever agreements we have signed, whereas I'm not pushing them down, I think the priority of the government should be on the interest and welfare of the people of the country.
Okay,
first and foremost.
I mean, Mr. Lawrence Utasha, it'll be very exciting if we in Nigeria too can be able to tell the likes of Russia what we can condone, and the likes of Saudi Arabia what we can condone. But have you gone to the market lately? Have you seen the price of commodities? Have you seen the so-called price of rice in the market? And if you have, seen how it's biting down on the citizenry, what's your take on this?
Well, on that matter, very valid point you have raised, but it's purely an issue of demand and supply. It's about the economic theories. Otherwise, for the local production, the question we need to ask ourselves is, the people involved in these local productions, have they been negatively affected by the closure of borders in such a way that perhaps resources used for production have been negatively impacted by price? I don't think so. I think it's just a case of price rise as a result of increase in supply, increase in demand caused by some limitations in the hitherto supplies we had from around the outside of the borders, some legal, some illegal. And I may be persuaded to think along those lines that
Mr. Atasi, you're saying it's just a case of demand and supply. In a country that has become the poverty capital of the world, in a country where people find it difficult to eat, in a country where over 50 million people can't live on less than $2 per day, it's just a case of demand and supply. Don't you think this will deepen poverty? People can't eat. Both of us, me and you, we're part of the elite. That's why we can sit down here and talk. People can't eat on the streets.
I agree completely. I agree, and I won't fault your submission, but even if you open the borders today, it will also limit the purchasing power of the Nigerian people. And that, I feel, has to be a discussion that goes along the line of the minimum.
Mr. Lawrence Utasha, we'll quickly go on a quick break. We'll come back and we'll talk some more. Thank you.
Welcome back. You're still watching the Morning Show here on Arise News, and we still have from our Abuja studios Lawrence Utasha, a public affairs analyst, discussing the continued border closure by Nigeria with his neighbors. Cheita, did you have a question there? Or
I did, actually.
Great.
I just want to buttress on the point that Adesua made earlier, talking about the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. Now, it's supposed to make the Africa, one of the biggest trading blocs. However, if we have our borders closed, don't you think that affects an agreement that the President Buhari has already signed?
Like you rightly said earlier on, it takes effect from July. And for now, like the spokesperson of the customs mentioned yesterday, it's going to be in place until 31st of January 2020. So I'm of the opinion that by January 2020, we'll review the pros and cons, the impact and the gains thereof before we now look at what happens. But like I keep saying, it has to be holistic. And maybe I need to say this so that I don't pass across a misconception. I am not of the opinion that this closure would not have a negative effect on Nigerians. I am not of the opinion that the closure, when I say the prices of commodities in the market are affected by demand and supply, I am not in any way trying to toe the line of argument of one of the executive ministers mentioned sometime in Kanu. All I am saying is some aspects of our production locally have not been really affected in such a way that we should have this price hike, particularly in rice production, the way we have it currently. But again, let me just make this point and submit. I think sometime in Benue, we had the government go into farming too. We had the ADC, such a way that the government was competitively into agriculture and could have the price modulation by having their own products in the market. I think some of these things, if they were originally put in place, it will help mitigate the escalating prices of food commodities.
Well, just to buttress your optimism and, your submission, parts of your submission that you have made today, the World Bank does estimate that 80% of all imports into Benin are destined for Nigeria. So Nigeria is doing this to say they want to increase production, attain sufficiency, and improve the economy. But let me ask you, how long do you think that this border closure should last? Because initially it was just temporarily, and then now it was total. And now 2020 date has been debunked. They say it's the first phase of the joint operation that would end and not the border closure itself. How long do you think that this border closure should stay in place?
You know, that's the reason why I keep talking about a holistic plan.
What
if
is
I
this
tell you a
holistic
time
plan?
frame now,
break it down.
I would only
How
be lying.
holistic should it be?
Thank you.
Make
Thank
it practical.
My perception of policies like this is they should be hinged on some sort of a national development plan that looks at not just the economic, not just the security, it looks at the social. When an issue is multifaceted, the persons involved in it should actually be involved in the discussions. For instance, I wouldn't have expected that such a strong policy should only be from the executive. I would have expected it to pass through the legislature, the representative of the people, perhaps a public hearing. And what this means is that it will not be a knee-jerk policy. It will be a policy that looks at the pros and cons and then agrees that the pros are more important or overweigh the cons, and then you go into it. I give you an instance. We want to increase the number of entrepreneurs, their capacity to deliver local content. This is very good for them. The entrepreneurs will agree with you. The security people also agree with you that it will help check trans-border smuggling and all that stuff. Very correct. The other small-scale SMEs that depend perhaps on imports around our neighboring countries may not agree with you. So if this is looked at, perhaps it will not be a total closure now. It may be some sort of partial closure that still allows some element of screening of essential things that we cannot ordinarily have here, instead of closing completely to whatever is coming in and whatever is going out. There's an argument that all other things coming into the country should go through the seaport. But then the question is, how effective are our seaports in discharging goods that come in there? You look at the percentage of spread of Nigeria along the Atlantic Ocean, from Lagos all the way to Calabar. Compare it with what you have in Cotonou, Benue, and Ghana. You see we have a wider spread. What it means is that we should ordinarily not be having port congestion. But unfortunately, we have that situation. We need to would have asked ourselves this question. Why is it that 80% of imports that have destination in Benin end up in Nigeria? Why don't they come through Nigeria? That is the question that, if properly answered, will determine how long or how short we should close our borders.
Oh, okay.
I think there is a challenge of efficiency.
I'm happy you've been able to unbundle this so-called, it should be a holistic view. But you see, in the long run, the businesses that you're trying to protect, they're going down the drain. I mean, I know of some SMEs in this country that trade with other parts, and they manufacture products in this country and sent to other markets. But their businesses have shut down because of this. I also know that symbiotic relationship of trade, take for instance from Ghana into Nigeria and some other parts like that, they're shut down. Recently, there was a report that was released about farmers in Niger that you talked about, were complaining bitterly of how their commodity were increased, because you're talking about the fact that Niger doesn't have a seaport and things like that. Well, you forget that Niger too brings grains into this country, and most of the so-called grains we have are brought into from Niger, which is a symbiotic relationship we have with them. So invariably, by isolating Nigeria and not being able to trade with the land borders, which are probably the most efficient, then you're having a big problem. The land borders are so efficient that the African Development Bank wants to build a highway from Nigeria to Abidjan for about $5 billion. So, I mean, unbundle all of this for me. Businesses are crying. Is it not time to stop?
From your submission, I agree with the symbiotic relationship, for instance, with Niger and Nigeria and grains coming in. And for somebody who is from Benue State, the food basket, some of those reports were embarrassing to me. We have no reason whatsoever to be importing grains from Niger Republic. Yes, there are certain things that may do better there, but you can't compare the amount of rainfall we have all over Nigeria to Niger. So the element of our being lazy and not still working within the holistic plan. Invariably, I may end up saying, yes, I agree with border closure. Maybe it's a little bit too early, but definitely I agree with it. But when are we going to be ready for it? Which takes me back to the analogy of the egg and the chicken.
I'm so sorry, let me come in here. There are a lot of simplistic arguments. There are some countries that have a comparative advantage. If Niger has a comparative advantage in grain, let's allow them.
Correct.
China still imports a lot of soya bean from America. America is one of the biggest exporters of soya bean to China. So those are simplistic arguments because that's why we work. That's what's a global community.
So what is our own comparative advantage? What's our own competitive advantage? We've not developed any. We probably don't even know what we have in advantage, as an advantage. And that's my argument. That's the whole gamut of the holistic view I'm talking about. What do we have as an advantage? We have yam in Benue, yes. Nigeria exports, the 70% of the yam exported out of Africa comes from Benue.
We have cassava.
But the last time we tried to take yam to the UK, what happened? We have cassava, exactly, almost all over the country. Have we developed the value chain? No. So for the people who are arguing about competitive advantage, I mean, I saw that write-up too. I agree with it to some extent, but we don't have any. We have developed. That is why we're a dumping ground. So maybe if we cage ourselves, I'm sorry to say this, maybe if we cage ourselves, it will make us to bring out the beauty in what we have in ourselves. Maybe. But then it is also a question of, is it politics or is it governance? And that is why you need to hear a lot of people. You know, it's difficult to stand on one side and refuse to see the other views from the opposing side. And it is really not wise to even do that. And that is why I mentioned about having a public hearing. You may just be persuaded with some other views that will make you subsume yours. But in the interim, on the basis of what we have seen so far, let's get to January 31st, 2020 and see if we can have a partial opening of the borders. I would go for it, I mean.
Okay, we'd like to say a very big thank you so much, Mr. Lawrence Utsaha, for talking to us as regards it. But quickly, in real summary, when you look at it, a lot of people are arguing that China tried this during Mao Zedong. They called it the Cultural Revolution. China shut in. They were not trading with the world.
Yes.
But China was really poor until 1979, where Deng Xiaoping came in and started trading with the world. And from then, China advanced as an economy.
What we need to be looking at now is how we can revitalize and stimulate the agricultural sector. Because if we are indeed, we have fertile ground in Nigeria, and if there are automation and practices put into, implemented, and the technology is set in place, as it is now, we know that we're one of the biggest importers of rice, but we still don't have the infrastructure. So I really hope that we can do something about it.
Others will talk about the efficiency and capacity of those you put at the borders. Maybe if there wasn't corruption in the first place, you would not need to be closing the borders. Thank you so much for watching the show today. That brings us to the end of the show. I'm Adesoa Omorowan.
Rafaya Sedi.
And I'm Sheto Atigari. Thank you for watching. From our entire team here in Lagos, enjoy the rest of your morning.